David had spent over 70 years collecting things. His house, a modest two-story home in a quiet neighborhood, was filled with objects that told the story of his life. Every shelf, every drawer, every inch of space carried traces of the past, a collection of moments frozen in time. Books he had sworn he would read one day, clothes he no longer wore but kept just in case, gifts from long-lost friends, souvenirs from trips taken decades ago. He never questioned the growing weight of these things. They were memories, anchors to a life well lived, or so he had believed. One evening, as he reached for an old photo album on the top shelf of his bookcase, the entire structure groaned under the weight. Before he could react, the shelf gave way, sending books, papers, and trinkets tumbling to the floor. A framed photo of his late wife slipped from the top and shattered upon impact, shards of glass scattering across the hardwood. David stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat. The house, once a sanctuary of familiarity, now felt suffocating. Kneeling down, he picked up the photograph. His wife's smile, untouched by time, gazed back at him. For years, he had surrounded himself with these objects, believing they preserved the past, keeping the people and places he loved close. But in that moment, he didn't feel warmth. He felt exhaustion. The weight of decades pressed upon his shoulders, not just in the things that had fallen, but in everything he had held on to for so long. He sat there for a long time, staring at the mess around him. Something inside him shifted. The house, once filled with comfort, now felt more like a storage unit than a home. Every object had once meant something, but now they only seemed to take up space, reminders of a past that no longer fit the life he was living. He thought about his son, Michael, who had moved to another state years ago and had gently urged him time and time again to let go of the excess. "Dad, you don't need all this stuff," Michael had said during his last visit. David had brushed it off, insisting that every item had meaning. But now, staring at the scattered remains of his past, he wasn't so sure. That night, sleep did not come easily. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the echoes of the falling book still ringing in his ears. The thought gnawed at him. Why had he held on to all these things? Had they really given him comfort, or had they simply become a barrier between him and the present? If they were meant to keep his memories alive, why did he feel so weighed down? As the first light of morning filtered through his window, he made a quiet decision. He would start letting go. But as his eyes moved from the bookshelves to the closets, from the cabinets to the attic, the enormity of the task settled in. Letting go wasn't just about removing objects. It was about unraveling the belief that they defined him. It was about confronting the fear of what remained when everything else was gone. He wasn't just decluttering a house, he was decluttering a lifetime. And the hardest part wasn't deciding what to keep, it was accepting what he no longer needed. The morning air was still cool when David stepped into his living room, now marked by the disorder of last night's collapse. The broken glass had been swept away, the books stacked neatly in the corner, but something deeper had been disturbed, something he couldn't put back the way it was. For the first time, he saw his house not as a place of comfort, but as a burden he had unknowingly carried for decades. Every object, every piece of furniture, every drawer filled with things long forgotten seemed to whisper the same question. Why are we still here? He took a deep breath and reached for the first thing his eyes landed on, a heavy wooden box tucked beneath the coffee table. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. Inside were old letters, faded postcards, ticket stubs from movies he barely remembered seeing. He picked up a letter, unfolding the delicate paper with care. The handwriting was his late wife's, a note she had left him on their 25th wedding anniversary. "David, no matter how much time passes, know that my heart is always with you. Life moves forward and we must move with it." His chest tightened. How long had it been since he last read these words? He had clung to them, believing that keeping the paper itself would keep her closer. But now he realized that her love was never in the ink or the parchment. It had always been in him. He traced the words with his fingers, then gently folded the letter back and placed it inside the box. He wasn't ready to let go of it just yet, but he knew now that one day he could. Moving through the house, He ran his hands over objects he hadn't truly seen in years. A porcelain vase his mother had given him, collecting dust on the mantel. A collection of vinyl records untouched since the days he and his wife would dance in the living room. A set of fine china, used only once or twice, stored away, as if waiting for a special occasion that never arrived. The weight of it all pressed down on him, heavier than he had ever noticed before. He felt a sudden urgency, a need to reclaim the space he had lost beneath all these things. He made himself a promise. Each day he would choose one item to part with, just one. He started small, a stack of old magazines, yellowed with time. As he carried them to the recycling bin, he felt a strange sense of relief, as if a single thread had been pulled from a tangled knot. That afternoon, he sat on the porch, watching the world move around him. A couple walked by, hand in hand, talking in hushed voices. A young boy rode past on his bicycle, laughing as the wind caught his hair. Life was happening outside his walls, flowing forward, unburdened. And for the first time in years, David felt the possibility of movement within himself. Letting go wasn't just about clearing space, it was about making room for something new. David stood in the middle of his living room, surrounded by the quiet weight of his belongings. The house felt different now, as if it had been holding its breath for years, waiting for him to notice the way it had become a museum of his past. He had spent decades adding, collecting, keeping, but he had never truly asked himself why. He ran his hand over the spine of an old book on the shelf, one he had intended to read but never did. There were dozens like it, reminders of unfinished, intentions of the person he once thought he would be. He pulled the book down, flipped through its pages, and then closed it. He placed it in a box by the door, the first of what he hoped would be many. At first it felt insignificant, but as soon as he let it go, he sensed something shift inside him. It was a small release, a single drop in an ocean, but the tide had begun to turn. Determined, he moved through the house with new eyes. He opened a closet that had been closed for years, the hinges creaking like an old door to a forgotten world. Inside, neatly folded sweaters sat untouched, shoes lined in perfect, rose jackets still carrying the faint scent of the past. He picked up a coat, one his wife had given him on his 60th birthday. It was beautiful, well made, but he had only worn it a handful of times. He ran his fingers over the fabric, remembering the way she had smiled when he put it on. He had kept it because it reminded him of her. But as he held it now, he realized that her love was never in the coat. It was in the warmth of the memory, in the way she had known him well enough to choose something he would like, in the way she had laughed when he protested that it was too expensive. A thought struck him. Someone else could be warmed by this coat, someone who truly needed it. The idea filled him with a quiet sense of purpose, replacing the reluctance with something lighter. He carefully folded it and placed it in the donation pile. He moved on to the kitchen, where cabinets overflowed, with dishes, cups, and silverware, far more than one man could ever need. He set aside a few pieces, keeping only what he used regularly. The rest he packed away. He imagined a young couple just starting out, finding joy in these items. He imagined hands reaching for the same plates he had once used, giving them a new story, a new life. By the time the afternoon sun filtered through the window, the house had begun to breathe. The walls seemed to stand taller, the air felt lighter, and David, for the first time in years, felt as though he was not just making space in his home, he was making space in his life. The first morning after clearing out his home, David woke up feeling something unfamiliar: lightness. It wasn't just the extra space in his house, the neatly arranged shelves, or the absence of overstuffed drawers. It was something deeper, a sense of clarity that had been buried beneath the weight of things for so long. He sat at the kitchen table with a simple cup of tea, watching the steam rise, noticing the way the sunlight danced across the wooden surface. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about what needed to be fixed, organized, or sorted. He was just there in the moment, and it was enough. That day, instead of filling his hours with tasks, he let himself wander. He walked through the neighborhood, something he hadn't done in a long time, simply because there had always been things to do at home. He passed by houses he had never truly looked at before, noticed gardens in bloom, heard birds singing in a way that felt clearer, as if the world had always been this alive, but he had been too distracted to listen. He stopped at a small park where a group of elderly men were playing chess under the shade of an oak tree. One of them, a man with silver hair and a warm smile, looked up and gestured to the empty seat across from him. David hesitated for only a moment before sitting down. They didn't need to exchange many words, just the quiet understanding that comes with age, the kind of companionship that doesn't require explanations. As they played, he found himself fully engaged, not thinking about what he had left behind, not worrying about what came next. Just a game, a cool breeze, and a stranger who, in that moment, felt like a friend. On the way home, he passed by a small cafe, the kind he had always meant to stop in but never did. He stepped inside, ordered a coffee, and took a seat by the window. He watched people come and go, young couples laughing, a mother holding her child's hand, an old man reading a newspaper. Life was happening all around him, and for the first time in a long while, he wasn't just an observer behind the walls of his home. He was part of it. That evening he sat on his porch, feeling the cool air settle around him. The house behind him was quieter, emptier, but it didn't feel lonely. It felt open. He realized then that simplicity wasn't just about removing things. It was about making room for what truly mattered. It was about seeing, hearing, feeling life in a way he had forgotten was possible. The joy wasn't in what he had let go of. It was in what he had finally made space to embrace. One afternoon, as David sat on his porch watching the wind stir the leaves, he reached for his phone. He had spent years convincing himself that he was fine on his own, that people were busy with their own lives, that he didn't want to be a burden. But now, with his home quieter and his mind clearer, he realized something. He had let go of the clutter in his house, but what about the distance he had unknowingly created between himself and the people who once filled his life? He scrolled through his contacts, names he hadn't dialed in years, old friends, family, members, his son. He hesitated for a moment, then pressed call. "Dad?" Michael's voice came through, surprised but warm. David swallowed. "Hey, son, just thought I'd check in." There was a pause, then a chuckle. "Well, that's a first." David smiled, but the words stung a little. He had spent so long keeping to himself that even a simple phone call felt unexpected. But as they talked, the conversation flowed. Michael told him about his job, the new city he had moved to, the small joys of everyday life that David had missed out on, simply because he hadn't made the effort to ask. After they hung up, David sat with the quiet weight of realization. He had spent years holding on to objects from the past, yet he had let relationships slip away without even noticing. He had convinced himself that people would reach out if they wanted to talk, but maybe they had been waiting for him to do the same. The next morning, he decided to do something about it. He walked to a nearby diner where he used to meet an old friend, George, for coffee before life got in the way. The bell above the door chimed as he stepped inside, scanning the room. And there he was, sitting at the counter, just as he had always done. David hesitated for only a moment before walking over. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, the words feeling almost foreign. George turned, his face lighting up with recognition. "David! Haven't seen you in ages. Thought you forgot about us old folks." David chuckled as he sat down. "Yeah, I guess I got a little lost in my own world." They talked for hours, catching up on everything and nothing. The years melted away, and David realized something he had long forgotten. Relationships, like anything else, needed tending. They needed effort. They needed space to grow. As he walked home, he thought about all the moments he had missed, the laughter he had let slip away, the warmth of connection he had denied himself. He had been afraid of being a burden, but what if people had been waiting for him to reach out? That evening he picked up the phone again. This time he didn't hesitate. David had always assumed that peace would come naturally with age, that one day the mind would quiet itself, the past would settle, and he would simply exist in a state of calm. But now, as he sat alone in his newly decluttered home, he realized that peace wasn't something that arrived on its own. It had to be found, nurtured, chosen. The house no longer felt suffocating, yet there was an unfamiliar silence to it, a quiet that stretched beyond the walls and into his thoughts. Without the distractions of things, without the constant pull of what to keep and what to discard, he was left with only himself. And that was perhaps the hardest part. The noise of the outside world had been replaced with a different kind of noise, memories surfacing, regrets whispering, thoughts wandering to places he had long ignored. One morning, as he sat by the window with his tea, he watched a bird land on the fence. It hopped, pecked at something unseen, then took off again, as if the entire world belonged to it. He envied that lightness, that freedom from worry. Without thinking, he slipped on his shoes and stepped outside. The park was only a few blocks away, but he hadn't walked there in years. He followed the familiar path, letting his feet guide him without urgency. He found a bench near the pond, where the water reflected the sky in perfect stillness. He sat, inhaling deeply, feeling the air move in and out of his lungs, focusing on nothing but the simple rhythm of his breath. For the first time in a long time, he let himself be still, not just physically, but in his mind. He wasn't thinking about what he had lost, what he had given away, or what came next. He was just there in that moment, watching the gentle ripples on the water, listening to the wind weave through the trees. A thought settled in his mind, one that had been trying to reach him for years, but had always been drowned out by noise. He had spent so much of his life clinging to things, to memories, to expectations of what life was supposed to be. But peace wasn't in holding on. It was in surrendering, in accepting that everything in life, including himself, was part of something constantly shifting, changing, moving forward. He closed his eyes, letting the sun warm his face. He had been afraid that letting go would make him feel empty, but here, in this quiet, he realized something unexpected. He didn't feel empty. He felt open, open to the present, to the unknown, to the simple truth that peace had always been there, waiting for him to stop searching and just be. David stood in the doorway of his home, gazing at the space that had once felt so cluttered, so heavy. Now it was different. Not empty, never empty, but lighter, freer. The air moved differently through the rooms. The sunlight stretched further across the floor. He could hear things he hadn't noticed before. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant laughter of children playing down the street, the sound of his own breathing, steady and unhurried. There was a time when the idea of letting go had terrified him. He had clung to things as if they were proof that his life had mattered, but now he understood. His life wasn't in the things he owned. It was in the way he had lived, in the people he had loved, in the stories he carried within him. No object could hold those things better than his own heart. That afternoon, he took the last box of donated items to a local charity. As he placed it on the counter, the woman behind the desk smiled warmly. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with genuine appreciation. David nodded, but the gratitude wasn't just hers, it was his. He had spent so many years accumulating, believing that possessions gave life meaning. But now giving away felt more fulfilling than keeping ever had. As he walked home, he took a different route, one he hadn't explored before. It led him past a community garden where volunteers were tending to rows of tomatoes, peppers, and herbs. An older woman, her hands covered in soil, noticed him watching. "Ever done any gardening?" she asked. David hesitated, then smiled. "Not since I was a kid." "Well," she said, wiping her hands on her apron, "it's never too late to start." Something inside him stirred. The past few weeks had been about releasing, letting go of the weight he no longer needed. But maybe now it was time to begin, again. Not by filling his home, but by filling his days with new experiences, new connections, new life. The next morning he returned to the garden. He knelt in the dirt, feeling the rich earth between his fingers. There was something profoundly, simple yet deeply meaningful about it. The act of planting something, tending to it, watching it grow. It reminded him that life was always moving forward, always renewing itself, always offering a chance to begin again. As he sat back, wiping the sweat from his brow, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Not just peace, but purpose. He had spent so much of his life holding on, fearing what would happen if he let go. But now he understood. Letting go wasn't an ending. It was an opening, a clearing of space for something new to take root. And for the first time in years, David was ready. David sat in his favorite chair by the window, watching the late afternoon light spill across the wooden floor. The house, once crowded with objects he thought he couldn't live without, now felt open and peaceful. The weight he had carried for so long, both the physical burden of things and the emotional weight of holding on, was gone. He no longer felt tied to the past, no longer felt the need to fill the empty spaces with more. What remained was clarity, simplicity, and something he hadn't expected: freedom. For years he had believed that happiness came from preserving the past, from keeping reminders of the people he had loved, the places he had been, the life he had built. But now he understood that happiness was not in holding on, it was in being free. Free from the need to prove his worth through possessions, free from the fear that letting go meant losing something important. He had let go, and in doing so, he had made space for what truly mattered. He had found that peace was not about having everything in order, but about no longer feeling the need to control it all. It was in accepting the natural flow of life, in allowing things to come and go, in understanding that nothing, no possession, no moment, no relationship, could be held on to forever. And that was okay. There was a quiet beauty in surrender, in trusting that each phase of life had its purpose. Most importantly, he had learned that life was meant to be lived lightly. Not in the sense of carelessness, but in the sense of carrying only what was essential: love, connection, presence. Without the weight of excess, every moment felt fuller. Every conversation, every breath of fresh air, every sip of tea in the morning had become richer, more meaningful. Perhaps you too have felt the heaviness of holding on. Maybe you've been keeping things, not just physical objects, but past regrets, old wounds, or outdated expectations, because you're afraid of what might happen if you let them go. But what if letting go isn't about losing, but about gaining something better? Take a moment to ask yourself, what are you holding on to that no longer serves you? What burdens could you set down to move through life more freely? Maybe it's time to clear the space around you, to release the things that no longer bring you joy. Maybe it's time to let go of an old fear, an old resentment, or a version of yourself that no longer fits. Maybe it's time to trust that, like a kite lifted by the wind, you can only rise when you stop holding on so tightly. Happiness is not in accumulation. It is in simplicity, in presence, in learning to let go. If this story resonated with you, if it made you reflect on your own journey, I invite you to be part of this conversation. Share your thoughts, your experiences. And if you'd like to continue exploring the wisdom of a simpler, more mindful life, consider supporting this channel. Subscribe, leave a comment, or share this message with someone who might need it. Because sometimes all we need is a reminder. The less we carry, the lighter we become.